The first scream isn't human. It's the ragged, desperate bellow of a small brown cow echoing across a field gone hard from drought, the sound ripping through the stillness just before dawn. Ethan Cole is halfway out of bed before he knows why. He can smell the dust even indoors. Dry, chalky, the kind that sticks to the back of the throat, and he's pulling on his boots while the kettle on the stove shakes against the iron grate like it's nervous too. The phone call that wakes him is short and frantic. A neighbor boy who sometimes helps, voice cracking as he tries to explain that, "The little one's down, Mr. Cole, she's stuck, she's just come." Then a click, and the silence is worse. Ethan steps outside and the air is cold enough to sting. The sky a flat sheet of gray that could split open with rain or never give a drop. He whistles, and Scout comes loping from under the porch, tail low, sensing trouble. The gate to the yard moans as he swings it, a familiar complaint. And then he's walking the dirt path out past the shed, past the wind-torn prayer flag his late wife hung years ago, past the rusted rock picker that never quite worked right. Every step pops the crust on the ground. A breeze carries the metallic tang of old barbed wire and the faint sweet rot of last season's hay, and beneath it, something sulfuric like a struck match. He doesn't like that smell. Another cry shatters the quiet, sharper now. The little cow they call Cricket is the smallest in his ragged herd, barely more than a yearling herself, all big eyes and skittish ribs. She follows him like a dog most days, nudging his pockets for apple slices, bumping his thigh like she's checking he's real. He rounds the stand of cottonwoods where the creek usually runs and sees she's not beside the water at all. The creek is a memory, only a black slash of cracked clay, and Cricket's voice is coming from the old ravine beyond, where the ground sank after last winter's floods. He jogs and the earth shifts under him like it's thinking about giving out. Scout growls, hackles up, and Ethan slows. He calls Cricket's name even though she doesn't know it, not really, and her answer ricochets from a place that shouldn't exist. Down, beneath the rough tangle of sunburnt reeds and thorn bush, through a collar of collapsed dirt where there used to be pasture. He drops to his knees, fingers sifting sand and gravel, and feels the sudden sleet of cool air rising from below. The breath from the earth smells damp and old, a cellar smell, a ship's hold smell, impossible in this dry year. "Easy, girl," he says, and his words disappear into the hole. He pushes aside dead roots and sees a sliver of Cricket's flank far below, a twitching piece of her like a leaf stuck in a storm drain. She's down a shaft, narrow and viciously smooth, like something drilled or sunk on purpose long ago and forgotten under the grass. The edges crumble. He pulls back, his heart sawing. The ground has no right to be hollow here. From below comes a new sound, a hollow clank, not from Cricket. Ethan freezes. In the thin light, a curve of iron shows through the dirt wall opposite, riveted and slick with condensed sweat, a circle like a lid. Cricket bellows again, and the metal answers with a dull, close echo. There is something under his pasture that breathes back. He reaches his arm down and feels cold iron slick with mud. His fingertips find stamped letters he can't see, a ring embedded in the metal. He lifts and the earth around the ring whispers. The sound is wrong, like a door that's waited too long to open. He doesn't yet know that the moment he pulls will turn his life, that every debt and threat and quiet resignation he's carried will shift like plates beneath a sleeping town. He only knows the little cow is down there with something that isn't supposed to be real, and the ground itself is asking to be unlatched. Ethan lives in a house that's smaller on the inside than people expect. The front room is a patchwork of repairs, plaster over lath, boards over plaster, paint over boards, layers like tree rings recording winters of thin money. The kitchen smells like coffee and old iron when the stove gets going, and every cupboard has a door that doesn't quite meet the frame. On the wall, there's a calendar with the bank's logo and a square around the 29th he pretends not to notice, the day a man in a new truck and a tall hat drives out to remind him what he owes. He inherited the land and not the luck. The pasture he remembers as soft and green now crackles when he walks it. The well pump coughs before it drinks. The county chose his road last, always last, when the graders go out. He knows every sound the place makes and can tell when one is missing. The night train that stopped after the line drowned last spring, the coyotes that used to talk on the ridge, the low burr of bees in the clover. This year the bees left and took the clover with them. People watching this might know a place like this. Maybe you grew up where the wind named the time of day, where summer arrived like a hammer and winter crept in with teeth. Maybe you've stood in a yard and calculated whether the fuel will last, whether the fence will hold, whether doing one thing means something else breaks. If you're here listening to Ethan's story, maybe it's because you know that sometimes a single morning can bend the line of a life. If stories like this speak to you, plain people, old land, strange turns, make sure you're subscribed. It helps us keep telling them. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. City, farm, coast, mountains, another country, another life. These places feel closer when we talk across them. And if you've ever found something under your feet that made you stop and look around like the world had been hiding a second skin, I want to hear that too. Back at the sink, Ethan scrubs dirt from under his nails with a knife because the brush broke last winter and he never replaced it. He feeds Scout at the door, one hand on the dog's back as if the touch might ground them both. On the counter lies an unopened envelope with the county seal heavy as a stone. He won't open it until he has to. He stuffs a coil of rope into his pack and another coil because one is never enough. He adds an old flashlight with electrical tape like a bandage around the handle, a handful of apple slices in a sandwich bag, a short pry bar that belonged to his father. Before he steps out, he pauses in the doorway where the threshold is worn soft. He imagines what his wife would say if she were here. She'd tell him to be careful and he'd say he always is, and she'd laugh because it wouldn't be true. The sky outside is the color of wet wool. Somewhere close, a raven croaks like a hinge. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. There's a turn coming in this story, one that takes us from a calf in trouble to the kind of discovery people try to bury with deeds and threats. And as you listen, think about what you would do if the earth under your lowest field opened its mouth and said, "Look." Ethan works the edge of the sinkhole on his belly, spreading his weight, the rope around his waist bitten tight by a knot he trusts. Scout lies flat, eyes bright, ears flicking at echoes from below. He calls Cricket softly and hears her answer, a thin, exhausted moan from far down. With careful hands, he clears the rim, moving the dirt away in small scoops so it doesn't cascade and bury her. The shaft isn't random. It presents itself like intent. The sides are smooth as glassed clay, not the jagged crumble of a natural washout. Striations in the wall catch the weak light like fingerprints. His flashlight clicks. The beam cuts a pale cone in the cool rising air, and dust motes turn slow as snow. 10 feet down he sees the curve of a shoulder, the trembling of a flank, the black lash of an eye that doesn't understand. Below Cricket, just off to the side in the wall, the light finds iron, a circular plate the size of a wagon wheel partly uncapped from soil by the slump. A ring handle protrudes like an eyelet. Around the edge letters UNDERGROUND. Then his thumb smudges the rest, but he sees enough. There's a number 2, 4 digits and a dash half swallowed by clay. It's not farm gear, it's not a septic lid. It's older and more deliberate than either. "Easy, girl," he says again and uncoils the rope. He throws a loop and misses. The rope slaps the iron and sparks float in his imagination. Old iron always wants to spark in his mind, like a forge remembering itself. On the second try, he snags Cricket behind the shoulders and snugs the knot under her chin so he won't choke her. She kicks weakly. Her hooves click the plate, and the sound rings with a depth that makes him think of tanks, ships, carriages of air. He eases his weight back and the rope takes hers. Inch by inch, grunting, he raises her until her front legs scrabble at the lip and she gets purchase. Her body is slick with mud from a seam of wet farther down, and chill vapor smokes off her like breath on a crowding morning. She collapses beside him, sides heaving, eyes rolling, foamy spit stringing from her lips. He strokes the space between her eyes and she blinks like that is a thing she can still do. "You scared me," he tells her, and his voice is small in the big quiet. He turns to the hole because it will not be ignored. The iron plate sits like an old pupil in the earth's eye. He cleans the letters with his sleeve and finds a word stamped clean in the outer ring. Reservoir. Another beneath. Surplus. Beneath that, tiniest of all, stamped like a whisper. Federal property. His chest tightens. There were stories from his grandfather that people laughed at. The government hiding water deep under the prairie in the war years. Old pipelines spidering from forgotten wells. Sealed vaults to be opened in droughts. Everyone assumed the stories were code for moonshine cellars and lost money. He shines the light again. The number resolves. 1943-17. He knows the war years only from a trunk of uniforms his mother kept. The war feels as far away and constant as the moon. The ring handle is stiff at first. He rocks it back and forth and the ground shivers like a sleeping dog. He wedges the pry bar under the lip and levers. The seal gives with a pop he feels in his teeth. From below, a breath of air comes up so cold it burns his lungs, carrying a smell like rain that has waited in the dark. Scout whines in a tone Ethan hears only in storms. He lifts. The plate pivots on a hinge he can't see, heavy but willing once it starts, and the sound it makes is the opening of a long argument. The lid leans back against the wall of the shaft. Down in the dark, his light finds an iron ladder crusted with mineral bloom, rungs anchored into a poured cylinder, and the shaft widens into a cylindrical chamber that swallows the beam. Water moves down there. He hears it. Quiet, like a person breathing in sleep. The surface not far, slick black and patient. He lowers the light and it throws back a flat mirror. He sees his own face, a pale oval, and beyond it the light scatters, revealing an arc of stenciled numbers around the circumference and a rusted wheel valve as big as a millstone. A plaque riveted to the wall curls at the edges. Department of, then corrosion. Emergency, more corrosion. The word release remains, stubborn and clear. Something clicks under the light. A small, dying relay somewhere switching to a circuit that no longer exists. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. There was a time people built secrets like this under ordinary fields, believing the future was theirs to arrange. Then they left, and the land went on without them, and the secret lived by itself, like a seed. Ethan sits back on his heels and feels lightheaded with the cold exhalation. Cricket nudges his shoulder weakly, asking for the apple in his pocket now that the danger is past. He feeds her slices one by one, sticky juice running over his knuckles, and thinks about his well that coughs, the creek that's a scar, the neighbor's pond reduced to a dark puddle ringed by footprints. He thinks of the notice on his table and the layers of promises he has failed to keep, mostly to the land. He thinks about a valve labeled release. He doesn't climb down. He's not stupid. He ties off the rope around a cottonwood, loops the other end through the iron ring to keep the lid propped open a few inches. He trusts heavy things only when they're tied to heavier, and he backs away, gently coaxing Cricket up. He needs eyes on this that are not his, someone who will know whether he's discovered help or trouble. He calls Dr. Maya Reed, who has a truck with a vet kit and a way of looking at problems like they didn't scare her. When she arrives, she kneels by the hole and the temperature coming off it raises gooseflesh on her arms. She whistles. "You opened a time capsule," she says, and her breath smokes though it shouldn't. He tells her what he saw, the words like stones in his mouth, and her eyes go sharper. "Don't touch the wheel," she says like he was going to. "Not until we know where that water goes. If this is connected to anything, I mean anything, downstream." He nods. He has the sudden feeling of stepping through a doorway into a room where people are already talking, and he's late, and the conversation is about him without his name. They decide Cricket is shocky, but likely fine. Maya wraps her in a blanket and gives her an injection, and the little cow leans on Ethan's hip like she's forgiven him for finding a world under her feet. While they work, a truck rolls up that makes Ethan's gut knot. New, clean, chrome shining in a sky that doesn't know sun today. The logo on the door is Huxley Resource Management, letters as crisp as a fresh suit, river blue stripe underlining the name like a promise. The man who steps out wears that tall hat and that smile that is not for smiling. "Morning, Mr. Cole," says Randall Huxley, as if he's always been welcome here. "Heard shouting. Thought I'd look in on a neighbor." His eyes find the rope, then the open hole, and the kind of calculation that happens behind an unblinking gaze happens behind his. He smells like expensive soap and something simpler underneath. Oil. "What do you want, Randall?" Ethan asks, standing between him and the shaft without meaning to. "Same as always," Huxley says cheerfully. "A fair deal for a fair piece of land. You look tired of fighting the sky. Let me take that burden." He peers past Ethan. "What is it you've got there?" His tone is light. His body angles like a blade. "An old drain," Ethan says. Randall laughs softly. "You and I both know that's not an old drain." He nods toward the plate, reading the letters that show. The moment the word federal scuffs his gaze, his smile deepens. "Well now," he says almost kindly, "this is interesting." By late afternoon, a wind moves from the west, pushing the gray like a broom. Dust lifts in streamers from the road and shivers into the fields. News travels the way wind does. Ethan keeps the lid propped and the area cordoned with fencing he drags from the fallow north quarter. Maya stays because she doesn't like the look of Huxley, and because she's the type who doesn't leave a wound at the first stitch. They sit on overturned buckets drinking coffee that tastes like burnt hope, and watch the horizon for county trucks. Ethan doesn't call the sheriff because the sheriff plays cards with Huxley on Thursdays. Huxley makes 2 more passes in his truck that day. The last one slow enough that Scout stands and puts himself between the bumper and the hole. The 3rd time, Huxley parks and strolls up with a clipboard and a folded paper that looks too official to be anything but theater. Due diligence, he says, tapping a page. As a public-minded citizen, I'm obliged to inform the county of any hazardous conditions, particularly those implicating federal. You inform them, Maya says coolly, and the first thing they'll do is ask how you knew to come out here. Huxley's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Open terrain. A man can see a lot when he's looking. Too much sometimes, Ethan says. He can feel the water below them the way people feel a storm, pressure pushing up against the soles of his boots. The air from the shaft tastes pure, so pure it feels wrong in the throat that's learned to accept grit. Huxley feigns boredom. This valley is dying, he says softly to Ethan, as if they are friends. The aquifer's slipped. The river is a skeleton. I'm offering to buy you a life raft and you insist on clinging to driftwood. He steps closer, lowering his voice. Whatever you found is protected, which means it's mine as soon as the legal paperwork catches up with the facts. Protected means protected, Maya says. Not for sale, not for you to divert, not for you to bottle and sell back to the people whose land you've already squeezed. Huxley tucks the clipboard under his arm. Ms. Reed, I admire your loyalty. He looks at Ethan. The bank doesn't take admiration, it takes checks. You'll need one of those on the 29th. Ethan stares past him at the bite mark the drought has left on the world. He thinks of his wife's last spring, how she stood in the doorway and said she was tired of being brave and then was brave anyway. He doesn't say a thing. Huxley doesn't need more. That night Ethan drags an old stock tank near the hole and fills it from his well, which protests because Cricket won't leave and he wants her close. He positions a floodlight on the hood of his tractor and points it into the open, because the open now looks like a door into a basement he's not sure is empty. He stands with Scout and listens. Water whispers. Metal settles. Somewhere in the chamber a tiny drip taps time. He tells himself he is not going down there alone at night, with an enemy who smiles and a past that built iron secrets. At midnight, the past comes up to meet him. A vehicle stops on the road with its lights off. Scout lifts his head and emits a single warning sound that isn't even a bark. Ethan kills the floodlight and the night folds around them like a cloak. He hears feet on gravel, deliberate, spaced, not running but not strolling, and the breath of men who have decided how this ends. He steps behind the cottonwood and feels the rough bark snag his jacket. The darkness is honest tonight. It gives away only what it must. 2 figures approach the fence, one carrying bolt cutters that flash only when the weak moon finds them. They clip, and the sound is both tiny and final. The men move to the hole. One kneels and shines a small light inside, the beam tight and mean. Well, I'll be, he murmurs, amusement soft as velvet. Ethan recognizes the voice. Huxley's right hand, a man named Tate, who learned how to be large in small rooms. Ethan steps out with the shotgun he doesn't like using but keeps for coyotes. Back away, he says, voice low enough that it's a private thing among the 4 of them. You're trespassing. Tate leans back on his heels and grins with half his mouth. The other man, thin, nervous, shifts the flashlight to see Ethan better and settles when he does. Evening, Mr. Cole, Tate says. We're here in the public interest. Maya's truck lights flare on at the far edge of the pasture and come at speed, gravel spitting from the tires. She doesn't blast the horn. She slides to a stop on the other side of the fence, steps out with her phone raised, and starts filming without a word. Tate's grin falters. Huxley didn't plan for an audience. Public interest works better in daylight, Maya says. Smile. Tate stands. We'll be back, he says, with papers and people who care. Bring both, Maya replies. We'll have our own. They leave, the cut fence sagging like a torn lip, and the night swallows them. Ethan's hands shake after, not from the weight of the gun but from a knowledge rising from groundwater to blood. What's under his field is worth more than the paper that threatens him, and worth enough that a man like Huxley will not stop pushing until he either owns it or ruins it so no one does. The next morning, before the county can arrive, Ethan and Maya lower themselves into the shaft. They rig a harness around Ethan because he weighs more, and a harness around Maya because she insists. Scout paces at the rim, nails clicking, then sits like he's holding the rope taut with his mind. The cold wraps them as they descend. Not a winter cold, but a stone cold, mineral and indifferent. Lights throw cones that reveal only slices of the chamber at a time, so the space always feels bigger than the seeing. The latter is sound. Handprints in pale efflorescence mark places where other hands once slid. At the bottom, boots crunch on grit. The chamber is a cylinder 2 stories tall, walls sweating, every rivet a small iron star in the beam. The water sits black and calm to their knees. Ethan half expects fish, ghosts, something born in the dark. He sees nothing moving but the light. The stenciled numerals march around the circumference: capacity, flow, intake. The big valve sits on a pedestal like a throne. Nearby, a brass box with a glass window shows a needle resting at 0, and a plate stamped, Distribution Grid C. Further letters lost to rot. A pipe throat the size of a barrel runs from the pedestal toward the north, the river's direction, sealed with a gate that could have been closed when his grandfather was a boy. Maya finds the plaque and wipes it with her sleeve. The words appear like desert writing after rain. U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, she reads. Emergency reservoir. Surplus release in extreme drought. Upon authorization. She laughs softly, the sound thin against iron. Authorization by whom? Ethan's light catches a shelf of folders in waxed canvas pouches above the tide line, miraculously dry. He opens one and finds a map printed on cloth, lines crisscrossing like veins. A red line runs from a dot labeled C17 under his own field to a junction labeled Elk Ridge Intake, and another line continues to a name he knows, Huxley Bend. There's a key with symbols for gates and probes. In the corner, a note typed on onion skin paper waves back from 1952. In case of drought severe enough to impair food production and human life, local operators may, at their discretion, open release valves to maintain minimum flow to downstream communities. Report to district office within 48 hours. Local operators, Maya says, eyeing the words like they might still carry their old weight. Who were they? Ethan's light grazes a copper tag bolted near the valve wheel, stamped with a series of names and years. Some are scratched out. The last name is faded but legible. C. Cole, 1961. He runs his thumb over the letters and feels the past reach up and take hold of his hand. My grandfather, he says. The word feels like someone else saying it into his mouth. He never said. Maya looks from the name to Ethan. They didn't put this here to be a museum, she says softly. They built it to be used, and they trusted your family to know when. Ethan hears the hush of water behind the gate, heavy and patient, like a long breath held by mountains. He imagines the riverbed outside filling to its banks, minnows skittering in rivulets where dust has sat a year, fields drinking, cattle noses dripping clear. He imagines Huxley Bend, where the company has carved channels like fingers reaching to tap the aquifer, where water is money and money is law. Above them, tires whisper on gravel. Voices float down. Official, certain. The county has arrived. Huxley will not be far behind. Whatever happens next, Maya says, her voice low, we don't let them turn this into a private spigot. If the law still means anything, it means the word downstream counts. Ethan sets his hand on the valve wheel. It is cold as kept silver. He doesn't turn it. He stands there and feels how turning would change the sound of his days. They come with vests and clipboards and caution tape that whips like banners in the wind. The county engineer, Celia Grant, compact, eyes like a surveyor's transit, descends halfway, looks, and orders the shaft sealed until jurisdiction is established. Federal property, she says, requires federal decisions. She seems honest, which is a kind of complication. Behind her on the ridge, Huxley stands where he can be seen, a small figure with a large stance, hands pocketed like a man waiting for a roast to finish. By afternoon, a crowd gathers at the fence, neighbors with folded arms and parched fields, a reporter from the regional paper with a camera he hopes will be his ticket out, Huxley's men in company polos, the sheriff with a mouth that says neutral and eyes that say don't rock. Phone screens glow. Words start to pile up. Injunction, liability, chain of custody, emergency powers. Maya argues about water rights with Celia in plain terms that make the legal words nervous. Ethan stands where he can see both the hole and Huxley, because both are dangers of different kinds. Then the wind shifts and from downriver an odor comes that turns faces. The cannery at Huxley Bend, where fruit used to be canned and now water is, has been dumping brine. In the drought's concentration, it stinks like something dead with a salt crown. People cough. Huxley's jaw tenses and he lifts his chin like he can rise above smell. The reporter snaps faster. Celia's nostrils flare and her professional calm tightens into anger. She tries to fold small. "Mr. Cole," Celia says, turning to him. "No one touches that valve." Ethan nods. He touches the rope at his waist like it's a talisman. He has no plan beyond, "Don't let them take this." He has a terrible plan. Open it anyway. The first shove comes in words. Huxley, finally unable to contain his performance, calls for attention and gets it. "Friends," he says. "Neighbors. We should all be grateful that a long-forgotten piece of infrastructure has been found, and we should all be patient while the appropriate authorities determine how best to deploy it for the good of our community. Meanwhile, I want to remind you that I have trucks standing by to haul potable water to any household in need. At cost." Murmurs. Some nod because trucks mean water tonight. Some glare because at cost means at Huxley's mercy. Maya steps onto the tractor tire like a stage and lifts her phone high. "Friends," she says, voice steady. "There's a law older than this drought, and younger than your grandparents, that says water in an emergency is for people first, then crops, then everything else. If this reservoir was built to keep us alive in years like this, and it was, then we have a right to see it opened under public oversight, not corporate convenience." The sheriff shifts, calculating wind. Celia looks from face to face and recognizes that engineering and politics share a blueprint, and she is in both buildings at once. Huxley's smile thins. He tips his hat back and turns to Tate. The two of them talk in a seam of shade. Words like temporary custody, corporate stewardship, protective fencing, liability shield. Tate nods and peels off toward the gate like a man assigned something simple and unpleasant. Break the stalemate. Ethan sees Tate's intent before Tate moves. He hears in his mind the sound of bolt cutters at midnight and knows what's next in daylight, an attempt to physically close and control what isn't theirs. He feels the valve not as iron but as promise, not his alone but his to defend because the plaque carved his name into the line of duty. He looks at Maya, and she reads his thought like a sign on a clean road. "You're about to do something irreversible," she says quietly. "Everything already is," he says. Down in the chamber, the air is colder, like the room has been waiting for this. He descends with the motion of a man walking into the river in winter, cautious, deliberate, breath shallow against shock. He hears the crowd only as a phasing hum. The lamp's beam is steady now because his hands have decided they aren't allowed to shake. He steps to the pedestal. The wheel's spokes are thick enough to bite his palms. He imagines his grandfather here in 1961, drought or flood outside, making a decision made for the living. Above, Tate and two company men move fast, carrying a metal panel, a portable fence section, and ratchet straps. They aim to cover the hole, strap it, claim it. Scout throws himself at Tate with a sound Ethan has never heard from him, a raw, ripping snarl. The dog's teeth catch Tate's sleeve and tear cloth. Tate swears and kicks, and Scout takes the kick without dropping his grip. The crowd surges. The sheriff moves too slowly. Maya steps in front of Tate with her camera and says with absolute clarity, "Touch that dog and you will wish you hadn't." Ethan closes his eyes just long enough to remember the weight of not acting. Then he opens them and turns the wheel. At first, nothing happens but the feeling of waking a sleeping machine. The wheel resists like a stubborn memory, then grudgingly gives a quarter turn, then another. Deep in the wall, a groan rolls the way thunder does when it's deciding whether to arrive. The gauge needle under the dusty glass rises a hair, then more. The water at their knees murmurs, shifts, and draws down, not much but enough to show the top of the gate as it lifts in tiny, persuadable increments. Then the sound comes, a rush that starts narrow, a throat clearing, then widens into a river's first word. Pressure equalizes through pipes that have forgotten their language and suddenly remember. The chamber's air goes sweeter somehow. The whole place breathes. Up above, the dry creek bed utters an impossible syllable and becomes a trickle. Fine as thread, bright as new money. Water pulses around stones that haven't felt it in months. The crowd falls quiet, as if someone has started a hymn, and all the words are older than anyone. The reporter forgets his angles and just points his lens blind. Huxley's mouth opens and closes and finds no shape that helps. "Close it!" Celia shouts down the shaft, torn between regulation and relief. "Just hold right there." She looks at Huxley and sees the danger isn't over. If the corporate trucks arrive now, they can position hoses, lay claim to the stream, frame themselves as saviors. Huxley gestures and Tate, Rage unbuttoned, lunges for the rope to haul the lid down. Scout meets him halfway again and Tate meets the ground. The sheriff finally remembers his badge and shoves himself between men, bark loud enough to shock a horse. "Back it up," he roars, and the old command finds its way into his bones. In the chamber, Ethan holds the wheel at a quarter open and watches the gauge steady in a range that looks right to him because right feels like neither greed nor fear. Water level lowers to the mark etched on the wall for minimum safe reserve. He draws the wheel back until the needle quivers and rests. He thinks, "This part is mine to know. This is not Huxley's." Something metallic snaps above. The portable fence tips toward the hole, pushed by a body or a gust, and a panel drops, skidding the rim. It caroms off the rope, slaps the hinged lid, and the lid lurches. The rope squeals on the cottonwood, jerks, and for one long breath, everything that holds turns and then doesn't. The lid slams down 3 inches and wedges. The chamber drops into sudden dim. The light ribbon at the shaft's edge narrows. "Ethan!" Maya's voice. "You all right?" "I've been worse," he calls. Half-truth. One hand still on the wheel because letting go of the thing that feeds the valley feels like a sin. He can climb, but he won't yet. He eases the wheel another hair and locks it with a rusted dog latch shaped like a question mark. It holds. He climbs the ladder with arms that are more anger than muscle. At the rim, he finds bodies straining against bodies. The sheriff's big shoulders, Huxley's suits, neighbors' calloused hands. Every part of the valley present and loud. Maya reaches for him and he takes her wrist and lets her weight help. He stands on his field and the creek beside them says the oldest word any land knows. Huxley's face is pale with fury and something exposed. "You will pay for that," he tells Ethan, not loud but so direct it's like a touch. "I already have," Ethan says, and the truth of it empties him and fills him in the same breath. The federal office arrives 2 days later with men and women who speak the language of valves without swagger. Celia meets them at the fence like someone who intends to remain part of the sentence, not an aside. Maya hands over video, copies of the cloth map, the plaque photographs with C. Cole stamped like a commandment. The agent in charge, a woman with hair the color of the creek mud used to be, inventories what's there and says, "It was built to be opened in years like this. Good you didn't wait for a memo." They establish a schedule under emergency provision. Quarter turn at sunrise and sundown, enough to keep flow to the downstream municipal intake and the ranches that actually feed people, monitored by a small committee with Celia and Maya and 2 elders who have watched the river long enough to know its moods. Huxley files an injunction. The federal office counters with a doctrine no one has used in 50 years, public trust. Lawyers go to work like crows on a fresh field. In the meantime, water runs, and that fact embarrasses paper. The sheriff, stung by his own delay, charges Tate with trespass and attempted interference with critical infrastructure. The charges will be pled down to something that sounds less sharp, but the sound still rings. Huxley's trucks idle at the edges of town and then idle away, their drivers stared into retreat by people with new steel in their spines. The cannery scales back discharge under threat of a fine that could peel the paint off its office door. On the 29th, Ethan sits at the kitchen table with the envelope at last slit open, and a second letter under it he never expected, a notice of temporary relief, anchored by federal involvement that guarantees his well won't sigh dust this season, and his field won't burn from the inside. It isn't money. Not yet. But the bank likes the smell of certainty, and the phone call is surprisingly friendly. He says little and listens and hangs up with his heart beating a calmer rhythm than it has in months. Cricket recovers. She follows him again like a dog, nosing his pockets for the apples he now never fails to carry. Scout sleeps near the hole as if guarding a story. Ethan repairs the fence and hangs a new sign on it, hand-painted neat. Reservoir C-17. Authorized personnel only. Underneath, smaller. Community watch. People take shifts sitting on lawn chairs like it's a parade, and in a way it is. A parade of days in which the creek talks to itself again, and the cottonwoods remember they're supposed to be green. He walks the edge of the water at dusk and the sound is a balm. A heron stalks on ridiculous legs. Tadpoles scribble in shallow pans that have not held breath in a year. Farther down, kids throw rocks and clap for the plop. The air smells like wet stone and sun-warmed algae and a faint tang of iron that feels like a promise to keep things from rotting unchallenged. He thinks of his grandfather's name on that tag. The fact of it sits in him like a key that fits more than one door. He doesn't know why the story was lost. Maybe pride didn't allow telling. Maybe secrets grow heavy enough that you forget you're carrying them until someone else takes the weight. He knows only that a line ran from then to now and he stepped onto it when the little cow called panic into the morning. People will tell the story their way. Some will say he opened the valve out of stubbornness. Some will say Maya forced the county's hand with her phone. Some will say Celia remembered the law when others forgot. Some will say Huxley tried to put a lock on a heartbeat and failed. All of them will be right and wrong because no story this size belongs to one mouth. At night he leaves the window open and the house fills with the low noise of water over gravel, a sound like sleeping next to someone you trust to keep breathing. He dreams less of envelopes and more of gates. He wakes with the sun and checks the gauge at dawn as the committee agreed, hand on the wheel only long enough to honor the ritual. He says quietly, to no one and everyone, enough, and the river nods. If you stayed with this story to the end, thank you. If you want more plain lives, more strange turns, more places where the ground keeps secrets, be sure to subscribe and watch the next one we've got queued up. There's another field out there with another door, and when it opens, you'll be here to see it.